It's my Sabbath, and I'm coming to you with a Sabbath reflection on Great Inflation, Part 2, Sin. Great Inflation and Sin. It could be alternatively titled Great Inflation, What It Destroys, because sin always destroys something valuable. There's a section in Matthew's Gospel in chapter 3, actually chapter 4, on the temptation of Jesus. You've probably heard it if you're biblically literate. If you haven't heard about it, Jesus is led into the wilderness to do some fasting for 40 days and 40 nights. And when he's very vulnerable and weak, he's tempted to sin. And Matthew chapter 4 verse 1 says that Jesus was led into the wilderness by the Spirit for this purpose. And Satan came to him 3 times on 3 different occasions to tempt him to sin. The third one is the one I'll mention today, and that's the one where Satan tempts Jesus on top of a mountain. It says the devil took him to a very high mountain, and this is verse 8. Sounds like it was a supernatural experience. If Jesus had been fasting for 40 days and 40 nights, I don't imagine he had the energy to climb a high mountain. But we really don't know the details here. It says, devil took him to a very high mountain, showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, all these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me. This is what Satan is saying to Jesus. And you guys know how Jesus responded. Some of you can't get over this thing right here. You're so distracted. Part of the reason I wear it like this is because I'm going to share in a second. It's because I want to point out how distracted you are. You're distracted by stupid things. Jesus says to Satan, try to concentrate. Jesus said to Satan, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. And the devil left him. What you see in the face of temptation in Jesus is even when he's really vulnerable and weak, he's successful. By quoting scripture, he's incredibly stubborn. Jesus is incredibly stubborn. He has this strength, this perseverance in the face of weakness and temptation. And it's worth pondering on the issue of great inflation. I've had these other thoughts since our last time, Great Inflation Part 1, a couple days ago. There was a comment on that from Jeremy. You probably saw the comment. Or Jeremy asked me if I would write an op-ed in response to the Wall Street Journal article that we were talking about. And I responded in part to Jeremy there in the comment, but I wanted to fill out a further response and just flesh it out a little bit. Thought it would be a good opportunity. Because I was thinking about Jeremy's challenge to me, and I thought, well, there was an intuitive response. I was trying to articulate it there in that comment, And what I said to Jeremy there was that the guy that wrote that article in the Wall Street Journal is himself a grade inflator. And he has a prestigious position. And he says in that article that he doesn't, he goes along with it because he doesn't want to punish his students. Because if he's the only one not inflating grades, then the students will feel punished for getting a lower grade relatively to what the other students are getting in other classes, and this is kind of unfair to those students. And I'm extremely skeptical that that's the real reason he inflates grades. I think the real reason is he will lose his job, and he knows it. The real reason is the students just won't sign up for his class, and he won't have students. And if that happens, then they will have to let him go. Doesn't matter if you have tenure or not. If students will not sign up for your class, you'll lose your job. And he has a prestigious position, but prestige has been redefined to the opposite of what it used to mean by his own admission. If you read that, if you go back to the first episode on this, Grade Inflation Part 1 a couple days ago, you'll see that he says the most elite schools have the most lenient standards. That makes no sense at all. That's saying that prestige means nothing anymore. Elite does not mean elite anymore. Elite means easy. It means grade inflation. It means, if you read that Atlantic article that's in the comments, it means in some cases the students don't even know how to read. They can't even read a book. So what does grade inflation destroy? How is it sin? Be interested to hear your comments in this. There's a couple different kinds of sin that have been distinguished. One type is sin of omission. Another one is a sin of commission. If you notice that I have a little bit more even keel today, it's because it's my Sabbath, and this is just a Sabbath reflection here. It's not supposed to be work for me. Sin of omission is when it occurs under circumstances where there's an obligation that one has that one fails to meet. For example, if you have a financial obligation to your landlord to pay the full amount of rent on time, and you don't do that, that's a sin of omission. If you're negligent, if you have other priorities, if you have excuses, provided you have the money, it's a sin of omission. A sin of commission would be a direct violation of something that you're prohibited from doing. So you do what you're prohibited from doing under the circumstances such as you're prohibited from murdering and you do it anyway. You are prohibited from hurting your child in such a way to kill your child, and you do it anyway. That's a sin of commission. I think abortion is a sin of commission in the majority of cases. Some sins could be either one. Take, for example, the sin of, you have an obligation to honor your father and your mother, according to the Ten Commandments. Well, if you fail in that obligation, it might be because of negligence. It could be because you have other priorities, you're lazy, and you commit a sin of omission when you fail to do something you have an obligation to do. It could also be a sin of commission, where you dishonor your parents by something you did. So there's an example of something that a sin that could be an act of omission and commission. Okay. Well, how does grade inflation fit in with this? Well, go back to what I said to Jer about why I'm not going to write a response, op-ed response to that. Because the grade inflators that would be to acknowledge that the grade inflators are the ones setting the stage for the debate. This would be, I don't want to pretend that this is a neutral area for debate on grade inflation, when the people that benefit from grade inflation are the ones providing the debate stage as if they care about the truth, which they don't. Grade inflation is a pervasive phenomenon, and it goes to the heart of the human condition here in America right now. I think some of the worst purveyors of grade inflation are parents who commit sins of omission against their children. I think they have an obligation to their children, that their children learn how to learn. And I think a lot of parents don't care about that. I think a lot of parents just want prestige for their kids, and they want it as fast as possible and right now. So you'll hear parents a lot be so proud of their kids, which is quite natural. And they want the best for their kids. So they will send their kids into the mountain with Satan, where Satan says, I will give you all of this if you fall down and worship me. That's all you have to do. And the kids go along with it. Why would they not? And the parents are at fault, because the parents are the ones sending them there, and so proud of Johnny for getting into Columbia or getting into Berkeley or Stanford. I see my own friends on Facebook saying stuff like this, and they have no idea they're sending their kids right into hell. Well, actually, they do know. That's why it's a sin. They do know. They should know. If they do know, it's a sin of commission. If they don't, it's a sin of omission. They should know. It's pretty obvious. What does grade inflation destroy? It destroys everything you care about. Like what? Well, like a fair criminal justice system. You care about that? The criminal justice system depends on having juries that can tell truth from falsehood. You can't tell truth from falsehood unless you've been trained and shaped to appreciate fairness and justice, and to have an ability to tell logical fallacies in argument. How do you know who to vote for? A lot of judges are elected. And I'm talking about state judges, right? Which are the closest to criminal justice system that we have. Most criminal justice is state. And so how do you know who to get in there? There are very different philosophies of the law. Some of them are legitimate, some are not. They're the exact opposite of legitimate. How are you supposed to tell the difference unless you have been trained to understand our system of law and what makes it special and unique? I'm checking off as we go, so don't worry. I got a whole thing here. I got a whole thing I'm going through. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through the whole thing today. I'm just going to do a series here. So it destroys the criminal justice system. It destroys voting. How is the American system developed? Who's in charge? I oftentimes ask this of my students, and I'm met with just stares like, I have no idea. It's the Supreme Court that's in charge. It's the president that's in charge. No one usually says Congress, which is really odd. There's 3 branches, right? They're supposed to be all equal. Well, the answer is that nobody is in charge of America. It's a trick question because the word America is ambiguous when we're talking about people. When we're talking about the land, it's not ambiguous. It's got geographical borders, despite what one political party pretends. There's no ambiguity with the borders of the United States. The Republicans have made a big deal of borders ever since the Civil War, when the Democrat South said, no, these borders don't matter. We're going to create new borders. The United States, under Republican leadership in the Civil War, said, no, the borders of the United States matter. The boundaries and borders matter a great deal. And that's why it was called the Union, to keep the Union together. And that's Republican. That's a Republican theme going all the way back to the Republican Party, the very beginning of the Republican Party. I'm going to do another topic on did the parties switch, and that's a lie. So we're going to talk about that later. That's a different one. But in our American system of government, who's in charge? The people are in charge. But what are the American people? Just like any other people, if there is a definition to people, the people, it's got to have an ethnic identity. And by ethnicity, I don't mean race, and I don't mean nationality necessarily. And ethnicity is elastic in terms of race. People can be adopted into an ethnicity. You can convert into an ethnicity in the case of Judaism. You can convert into Christianity. The gospel says you have to be born again. That language of being born is ethnic language. There's all sorts of ethnic descriptions of Christian, and it has nothing to do with race. When you're reading the book of Acts, there's different races that are mentioned. Just take a look at Acts chapter 8. There's an African mentioned. And that's sandwiched between Acts chapter 7 and Acts chapter 9. In Acts chapter 7, Stephen, who is ethnically Jewish, you read that text carefully, he addresses those people. He says brothers. That's ethnic language. They're not really his brothers. I mean, they don't have the same mom. that's ethnic language because ethnicity has to do with kinship and custom that's passed down from the older to the younger. That's what makes a people a coherent thing in the first place. Well, okay, go to Acts chapter 8. All of a sudden you're talking about some guy from Ethiopia. And he's being invited into this same people group. It is a people group. The word for nation in Greek is ethnos. In Matthew chapter 28, the Great Commission, go to all ethnos. Well, it's actually pantata ethne. It's the accusative, it's gender neutral, direct object, plural. Go to all nations. Ethne is the gender neutral plural of ethnos. Go to all the ethnicities. Convert them into your ethnicity, the Christian ethnicity. That's the command. Baptize them. Teach them to obey all I have commanded you. Well, that's just generally I could talk about the Chinese ethnicity. I could talk about American Indian ethnicity. Ethnicity in general just has to do with a people group tied together by kinship and custom, passed down from older to younger. And in America, the American people is the same thing. You can be adopted into the American people, just like in Acts chapter 8, the Ethiopian is invited to be adopted into this new people, the people of God. And in America, you can be adopted into the American people, but the older generation, for it to be the American people, have to teach the new what it means to be an American. So part of this is who's in charge in America. Who's in charge? It's not tribal leaders like American Indians. It's not the Sanhedrin or Pharisees like it was in first century Judaism. It's not the emperor and the mandarins like it was during the Han Dynasty in China. By the way, one major way of referring to the Chinese language is Hanyu, which refers to that same ethnicity, that same dynasty from 2,000 years ago. The American people are in charge of the government. If the American people are grade inflated, then who's in charge of the government? It's a stupid person in charge of the government. And it really means that somebody else will probably take charge because the American people are too stupid to know. Too stupid to understand what's happening. By the way, that was the end of the Han Dynasty. The Han Dynasty became corrupt, and they became complacent, and other people started taking over because the people that thought they were in charge were too stupid to understand what was happening. So they lost power and they lost control. The American people are in charge. When I hear people complaining about something that the government has done, maybe it's FEMA, maybe it's a particular government agency, maybe it's the FBI. There was a case in the FBI here in Southern California where they went into a Beverly Hills lockbox business where they had kind of like a bank. They rented secure lockboxes for valuables. Well, the FBI suspected that there was criminal activity there, and they claimed they had probable cause for a warrant. They got the warrant. The warrant said something very specific, written in language, that you have an authorization to go there, enter in, and take possession of lockboxes, but you do not have permission to open the lockboxes and do a search of the lockboxes without more specific evidence of criminal activity for that particular lockbox owner. Well, the FBI opened all the lockboxes anyway and seized everything. And they did an inventory, so they basically did a search without a warrant. This is a major case. I should do a series of episodes on that case. Well, who's in charge of the FBI? Who's responsible for this? Who's going to watch and make sure the FBI isn't going beyond the boundaries of a search warrant, for example? Well, you might say the American people are in charge. The American people are watching. No, they're not, because they're too great inflated to even know what the heck is going on. That's what great inflation destroys. It destroys the constitutional system, in this case, the Fourth Amendment protection against search and seizure without a search warrant, or without a credible exception to the search warrant requirement. Great inflation destroys everything that you care about. One way we could keep the FBI accountable is to create, I always say this, I think we should create a commission. Follow this line here, follow it. I think we should create a commission that's empowered to oversee and investigate the FBI abuses, or FEMA, or whatever you want to say, whatever it is. The next question I invite you to ask and answer is, who's going to keep that commission accountable? I have an idea. I think we should create an agency that oversees that commission. And that agency is responsible for ensuring the commission is overseeing the FBI. Problem solved. Some of you see where I'm going with this. Let that sit for a second. Here's the next question. How do you know that the agency that you just created is going to do a good job of overseeing the commission that's responsible for overseeing the FBI? I have an idea. I think we should create a new department that oversees that agency, that oversees that commission, that keeps the FBI accountable. That's my idea. You see the point. Unless the people are involved in a competent way to oversee this at the very beginning, let's not waste money on all this other stuff and waste time and waste paper, waste attention span. Just get right to keeping the government accountable. Well, that takes non-great inflated people. The more great inflation occurs, the less likely that is to happen. But there will be probably not any accountability, because there will be an appearance that it's happening, but it's not happening. And people will be harmed. Our whole future will be harmed. I want to give you a thought and a resource. Doing things the long way can help us appreciate what we have and how far we've come. Have you ever tried to make fire without matches or something like that? It takes a long time. You get cuts on your hand. 700 calories, and then when you do it the long way, you appreciate just a lighter. You can create fire with a lighter. It's an amazing thing. You only appreciate the short way when you do it the long way. But we have a tendency, if we've never done it the long way, to not appreciate the short way, and then we take the short way and we abuse it and we cause destruction. Like when you take a lighter, for example, and you light a building on fire. I mean, you misuse what you have. There are people that have never written a term paper longhand. They've never done it the long way, so they don't appreciate typing. They don't appreciate the ability that you can save your work on a computer and come back to it later and type and have it printed out. It looks better, it's easier to read, and it's also saved. So we have people who have never done it the long way, and so they're presented with a way to do it, a short way, and then eventually they're just lighting buildings on fire. They're just burning down the whole idea of writing a term paper. The professors I'm talking to now, they say 80% of their students have not written anything all year themselves. They're using AI. Which means they're not learning anything. There's a contempt. The short way has provided a contempt for anything having to do with anything in education. Just like you're likely to have just not appreciate making fire 2 seconds like that because you've never done it the long way. You don't know what it's like. You don't know the value of what you have. More on what grade inflation destroys next time. Happy Sabbath to you. I've enjoyed this time.